Welcome back, PLC programmers. In the previous part we played a little bit with hardware, but now it's again time to go back to the software parts of TwinCAT 3. When you start to develop PLC software and you've worked for a few projects, you will come to a point where you will notice that certain parts of the software, like function blocks, will be copied between the projects. You'll either do it by simply rewriting the same functions or function blocks again, or you will simply copy and paste it from one project to another. Also, once a project gets big enough, you will want to utilize something called libraries. With libraries, you can organize code in such a way that it can be used by multiple projects that might not have any connection to each other, but that have shared functionality. Then you can have code that is specific for a project or program only within that particular program. Libraries are very common in other programming environments. TwinCAT is no different. Let's look a little deeper into this.
Let's imagine you are developing a PLC program for a machine. Let's call it PLC Program 1. When developing this program, you will implement various function blocks that make up the functionality of the program. In this case, it's a simple program with 3 function blocks, A, B, and C. Now let's imagine that you develop another PLC program for another machine at the same time or later. So for example, PLC Program 2. This program will have 3 function blocks, A, B, and D. The function block A and B are identical with the one in PLC Program 1. In this case, you might, for example, have copied them manually from PLC Program 1 to PLC Program 2. Function block C is specific for the first machine, while function block D is specific for the second machine. Now, instead of having duplicates of function block A and B, you can create a library and move the 2 function blocks to that library. Once you have the library, you can then make the PLC programs reference that library instead. By putting the function blocks in the library, it's easier to reuse code. We can have several projects share a common codebase of pre-programmed functions and function blocks. The value of a library lies in the reuse of standardized program elements. When a program invokes a library, it gains the behavior implemented inside that library without having to implement that behavior itself. Libraries encourage the sharing of code in a modular fashion and ease the distribution of the code. By putting certain parts of our logic into libraries, we will have to modularize our code in such a way that we can test the library code independently of the actual application code. We will look more into testing in part 17 of this tutorial. One disadvantage with libraries is that we have another software artifact to version control and keep track of, which really isn't a disadvantage until you've got a few libraries and get into something called dependency hell, which is a topic that is outside of the scope of this tutorial. Libraries are actually not something new for us. We have already been using several libraries which are made by Beckhoff. All these libraries are just standard TwinCAT 3 libraries, albeit pre-installed with the TwinCAT 3 installer. In a previous part of the tutorial we were using the TC2 utilities library, where we for example used the memory ring buffer function block. There is no reason to reinvent the wheel when Beckhoff already has done the work for us. What we'll do now is get into the action and learning how you create your own TwinCAT 3 libraries. Okay, it's enough with theory. Now we should do a little bit of practice. This is the project we finished with in the last part of this tutorial. And let's now just imagine that we have this is a project with this IFM sensor and we want to use it in more than one machine. Right now this is a project that is running with a specific PLC configuration, with a specific I/O configuration. But let's now imagine that we're building a second machine that has the exact same sensor. One way to do it is to create an identical project like this one and just copy paste this function block. So we just take this function block and copy it over to the second project. But that's not what we're gonna do. What we're gonna do instead is to create a library for this functionality. So we'll move this function block to a new library And then we will make sure to use this library in every PLC program instead. And the first thing I will do is that I will create a new project that will only be for the library. So it will be a library project where we will just store all our function blocks. So the business logic of our code. So we create a new project. And here I would recommend to create a project with something that describes a little bit what the library is used for. So the sensor that we have here is a sensor, but we could also have actuators. So I would recommend, for example, to create a library for different inputs and outputs. So we can just call this IO. Now create a new PLC project just as usual. Call this IO as well. I would already recommend you to clean this project up a little bit, because for example, we will, in a library project, we will never have any motion control stuff. Well, we can have motion control stuff in the sense that we can have function blocks to control drives and motors, but we will never have anything that's related to the actual execution of the motion control. So this we can hide. We can hide the safety, we can hide C++, analytics. Unfortunately, we can't hide IO. It would make sense to hide this as well, because again, the IO is part of the configuration of the actual executable. This will just hold the function blocks for the business logic. And now we can put our different function blocks here. So what I would do is I would just simply right click, copy, and paste. Now we can ask the question, do we need a program here? And the answer to that right now is no, we don't need any program in the library, because the library in itself will never be an executable. It will be compiled into an executable, so it will be part of an executable, but the library itself is just a collection of function blocks or functions or data unit types, but it in itself will never hold an executable. So we could delete this program. We will get back to this in part 17 when we talk about test-driven development and unit tests. We will actually have a program even in the library that is just there to test the different function blocks. And this is part of the stuff that I'm advocating a lot about in modern software development practices for PLCs, to always have unit tests for function blocks. But for this, you will simply have to wait for part 17. Right now, we'll just get rid of this program. We can get rid of this. Generally get rid of all the folders that you're not using. And now to define a library, it's actually very easy. You go to the PLC project, right click on it, select properties, and here you enter the details about the library that you want to create. So company, just enter the company name that you're working for. I'm just gonna make up a stupid name here. My company AB, in Sweden AB is aktiebolag. And title, so this is the title of the library. We can call it inputs and outputs, or IO, whatever. The version is basically a numbering scheme, so you can create one yourself. There are some standards and recommendations of how you should call what a version should mean, so what a bigger and lower number means. So in this case, I'm just gonna create 0.1.0.0. This will be incremented for every time you do a new release of the library. It has to be done manually. I've been working with companies where they have a build server that does this automatically, so it automatically increments this version. But for now, we will just create a version manually. You just have to make sure to increment this every time you do a new release of the library. The released flag is basically telling the library that, hey, once this is set, then you can't change anything in the library. It's just a protection, so you have to remember to change the version after it has been released. If I set this to released, it means I can't change anything in it, which forces me to change the version, or at least reminds me to change the version before doing any changes. But right now, we're not gonna set that. Library categories I'm going to get back to very soon. The namespace is quite convenient and good to use. This is to avoid this problem when, for example, you create a function or function block that already exists in another library. By using namespace, then when you call the function block or function, you can be explicit and say, hey, this function or function block should come from this particular library. We're going to see this in action soon. So we can actually call this IO. Normally, I would recommend to call the namespace whatever you call the library. In the outer field, just enter your name. And here you can add a tiny description. This library holds functionality for sensors and actuators. Yeah. And then I would also recommend you to add the global version structure here, because then you automatically get a global variable file which holds the version of this library, which can be useful, for example, when you use this library in another project. Then you can just expose this information and say, hey, this executable holds this version of the library. We're not going to get too much into that, but I would still just, as default, always include it. There's really no reason not to include it then. Okay, and this is basically all you need to do. Now, you need to compile this library and install it. And there's a very easy way to do it. And the way you go about it is that you right-click on the PLC project, save as library, and install. What this does is that it's going to create the library, it's going to create a file, which is the library, and then it's going to install it in a folder that TwinCAT has access to. So we right-click on it. Now you need to provide a place where the library should be saved. This is just a temporary place, because what TwinCAT will do is that it will take this file once it's stored in this, for example, the desktop, and then it's going to copy it to the TwinCAT 3 folder. So if you do like this, we save it. Now it's installed in the system. And what we're going to do next is that we will create a project that actually uses this library. So this will be the PLC program 1, as I showed in the presentation. So we create a new project, and this will be the executable, and we call it PLC program 1. So this is the PLC program for machine number 1 or whatever. You probably have a better name for this. You should have a better name than PLC program 1. I just want to demonstrate how to use this library now. We need to create an executable. So again, program 1. In here we will have our main program. And here is where we will actually have to use our library. But before doing that, we have to create a reference to the library that we just created. And to do that, we go to References, Add Library, and then you get this window. And this is showing part of the library manager. And if you look around here, then you kind of get confused and think, but where is my library? And then you'll get into this window. If you look at Miscellaneous, I hope I pronounced that correctly, you have the inputs and outputs from my company AB. I don't think it looks particularly nice. So while we're at it, I'm gonna show you how to make sure that this library doesn't pop up in the Miscellaneous. And to do that, we have to use exactly this thing called library categories. So library categories is something that you have to create. You have to create a category for your library. And to do that, we have to create it, and when you click here, there's no way to create it. You have to add one from a description file. So you have to create a file for this library category. So to do that, you can go to GitHub and my GitHub. So I will provide a link in the description of this video. And then you have TwinCAT library categories. You have to have this file and use this file as a template and adjust it to create your own category. So just download this file. How do we download it? So how do you download a file in GitHub? Okay, I feel really stupid today because I can't figure it out. What I'll do is just take the raw content, copy it, create a new file, and call it our library category. Let's see if we have a better editor. Do we have Notepad? Oh, Notepad++, perfect. So this is the file. The way it works is you can have a main category and then you can have subcategories. So for example, you could have a main category called my company, and then you can have a category called motors for that company. Right here, we're just going to keep it simple and create a main category and only have one category. So I'll remove one of these guys. All our stuff is going to go into one category, which is my company AB, for example. And then this is just an ID. It's called a GUID or something like this. I would just generate a new one. For this, you can Google GUID generator. How many do you want? One, generate, copy this guy. This is just to get a unique category. You can use the one I have from the file. You don't actually need to change it, but yeah, it's recommended. I'll put a link to this guy in the description below as well. So save this file. I accidentally saved it as txt, so rename it to XML. If anyone that's watching this knows how to save a file from GitHub, please write a comment in the description below. And then again, in your library categories, we need to add one from description file, point it to the file on the desktop. Yeah, it needs to end not with XML, but with .libcat.xml. So there we go. Unexpected token. Oh, bummer. There we go. And now, anyway, the reason I wanted to add this is because now if we install this library again, so again, install it. So maybe I went a little too quick. If you want to install this library again, right click, save as library and install, select the desktop, save, yes. And now if we go to our PLC program 1, we add a library. It doesn't work because there is, of course, some bug in TwinCAT, at least in this version. So we have to restart the development environment. I wouldn't say that there are more bugs in TwinCAT than any other PLC programming development environments. Everyone has their problems. And I've gotten to a point in life where I'm starting to, that I just don't care. I just restart everything and go on with my life. Or what I normally do is actually I send an email to Beckhoff and just, hey guys, you should look at this. Anyway, so my company AB shows up here. So we don't have this annoying MISC anymore. Instead you have our own. And this just looks so much cleaner, especially once you work for a while for a company, or if you run your own consultant business, you're gonna develop lots and lots of functionality over and over again. And then it just looks so much cleaner if you can organize it into these categories. And I just wanted to show you quickly that all of these libraries are stored in this folder called on the C drive, TwinCAT 3.1 components PLC managed libraries. And here you can see that my company AB shows up and the name of the library and then the version. And here is the actual library. We create a reference to it. Now if you go here, double click on it, we can actually see all the files that are in this library, which one of the files is the function block for the IFM sensor. So again, this is going to be our executable. So we want to create an instance of this function block. So right now we have a separate project for the library. So we maintain this. It has its own life cycle. Maybe there's even going to be some other developer maintaining this or another team developing it. And if you work for a very, very large organization, you usually have some part of the company that's just maintaining the standard type of libraries that everyone on the company should use. And this is one way to go about it. And then you have your programs that actually use these different libraries. So now we could create a second program. PLC program 2, a terrible name. Your name should be much more descriptive. So this could, for example, be a name for the machine that you're developing. Or this is a completely separate program, so this could have its own function blocks. And here you can also add a reference to this library by going here. Now that you have added this one, it means that this program has access to all the function blocks that are in this library. So we can just instantiate it. What was the name? FB05D100. And call it. And we recognize this, right? And we can also see that it's the library from our company. Now the namespace is, for example, again, if we would have created a function block or a function that's called concat, which already exists in the TC2 standard library, then the compiler wouldn't know, should I use concat from TC2 standard or concat from our library? Then you can just use the namespace, which was, if you look at the namespace, it's IO, and you can write IO, and then you're explicit and say, hey, please use the function block from this particular namespace. In this program is where we do the actual link into the hardware. So in here we would, as usually, as I showed you in the previous part of this tutorial, we would add the TwinCAT master, we would link it, and we would scan the bus, we would add the IFM master, and then we would add the IFM sensor, and then we would add these input bytes to the software. So again, if I compile this now, we get the instance here and we get the A input bytes, which we're gonna link to the TwinCAT master. I'm not gonna do that because I already showed how to do that in the previous part. One more thing I could mention is that this file that was created when we compiled the library can be removed. So if you go to the desktop, this io.library, it can be removed because this guy is actually copied over to here. So this is just for TwinCAT to temporarily store it somewhere before it's installed in the system. But that's basically everything I wanted to show.
Libraries are a very powerful tool to organize and manage your software artifacts. And when you start developing TwinCAT 3 software, you will quickly find the use cases for using them. This was a brief introduction into libraries. We will get back to this topic in part 14 of this tutorial, when we are going to talk about how to handle different versions of TwinCAT. Goodbye for now and see you in the next part.